There are 20 things that you propose men should look for, be aware of, be
Hmm.
privy to in regards to women. And I'd love to go through each one of them briefly with you. The very first red flag, which is a term we hear all the time, but maybe guys, people don't understand what it means. Red flag number one is avoid a woman with daddy issues. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so if a woman doesn't have a good relationship with a strong, virtuous man in her life, ideally her father, maybe if her father passed on when she was small, grandfather, or an uncle, then she's often going to have a fear of abandonment tied into things like borderline personality disorder. And they often act out in such a way that it ensures that awful things happen. One of the things that I strongly recommend guys do when vetting a woman for anything on a long-term basis, whether it's dating or to raise children together, is make sure you're dealing with a woman that has a good relationship with her dad. So some people get mad at that. They'll say, well, my dad was a bum, or he ran off, or, whatever the story may be. And I always encourage people to try and contact your father, if he's still around, and get the story before you believe, the narrative that might have been sold to you by some of the women in your family. He might have been an all right guy, and he might have got pushed out of the household, and he might want to have a relationship with you. So it's something to consider and understand. And if a woman's doing the work on it, she's going through some form of therapy to deal with whatever daddy issues she might have, or resentment she might have towards men, anger, any of those things, cool. It's definitely a red flag, but you want to pay attention to it and be aware of it.
That's a really good point. I would go one step further and ask, what about girls that have dads that made them into princesses, right? Daddy's little girl could never do any wrong. She adores daddy. Doesn't have any problems with dad, but dad was kind of a pushover. How do we spot that in a woman? Where does that kind of show up in her personality so that we can say, hey, she loves her dad. Yeah, but her dad's
Yeah.
a daughter sin.
Yeah, that's a good point. So a pushover dad is the kind of guy that she will run as she's an adult. So I'll give you an example. I got a friend that's married a very successful professional woman. Father's in the picture, has always been in the picture. He's a good dude. He's a nice guy. He's your quintessential Robert Glover nice guy, right? And there's a difference between a nice guy and a kind man. You guys can dig through that when you get to Robert Glover's No More Mr. Nice Guy book. But because mom ran him in the household, and he was basic. I mean, I don't want to use the word slave, but he behaved a lot like a slave. He's at her beck and call for every single thing. I mean, she's an adult woman. She's in her 30s. He's in his retirement years. He's not in the best of health, but when she says jump, he says how high. I need a picture hung, shows up and does it. I need a chandelier put together, shows up and does it. These pushover men, rest assured, it's another version of daddy issues. She's going to try to pull that with you in a long-term relationship or a marriage. She's going to try to run you.
Yeah. Okay. So number two is feminists. And this is a tough one because, it's hard to find a woman that isn't a feminist, at least at a conscious level. So when you say feminist, what exactly do you mean? And, what are some of the things that we can look for to spot that in an overt way?
Yeah, the overt signs have become pretty obvious now. Purple hair, overweight, covered in tattoos like a sticker book, in random places. These are the kind of gals that subscribe to beliefs which require them to be a victim, okay? And if you're a victim in an equation, you have to have an oppressor. You have to have somebody that's doing you wrong. Well, the oppressor happens to be men for them. And I think feminism had noble roots in its cause where it was looking for equality. But I don't think many people today would argue that there's things that women can't do that men are doing, There's some people that say, oh, well, women are still getting paid 70 or 80 cents on the dollar for every dollar that a man makes, but they're not taking into effect that men work more dangerous jobs and longer hours. There's pushes to put women in the boardroom for Fortune 500 companies, but there's no pushes to put women on the back of garbage trucks or coal mines or oil rigs. Those are all predominantly jobs done by men, and they pay a lot more because they're longer hours and more dangerous. So it's a bit of a lie. And I think at this point, it's been said a few times now by several different people. it's not an equality movement anymore. It's more of a supremacy movement looking for the subjugation and the bending of the knee to all women because of past manufactured traumas in many cases. It's just not good to be in a long-term relationship with any woman that has a victim mindset as a baseline, like as a foundation, because victims are just awful to be around. They never take ownership for everything. It's always somebody else's fault. If you have any disagreements in that relationship, it's always going to be your fault. There's going to be no ownership taken on her part.
So you mentioned that maybe feminism had noble roots. Tell me more about that, because there are those who argue that there's no such thing as good feminism. And if we're, saying that refraining from the victim mindset is an important thing here, I'm curious how do you reconcile that with there maybe being a good feminism?
Yeah, well, there's an example that I use in my book, actually. I think it was in the 1800s. I can't remember the exact date, but there was a law passed in London that prevented you from beating your wife after 9 o'clock at night, I think it was. And the roots of it really weren't to protect women. It was because of noise pollution issues. And they didn't want to hear their neighbors beating their wives while she was screaming, sort of thing. So they kind of started to adopt these things. It's like, well, why are we beating women? And I think that's a reasonable thing. Like, why are we beating women, right? Like, is that absolutely necessary?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I can see that. Number 3, the unhappy and unlucky. So, why would you want to stay away from an unhappy woman?
Oh, yeah. The unhappy, the unlucky woman. She's going to come home for work. She's going to be complaining about the part-timer that shows up late, doesn't do her job properly. She has to pick up the slack. Just everything. There was that acronym that popped up about 20 years ago in my life. It was FML, and that basically stood for F my life. The unhappy, unlucky will go to that all the time. I'm just always unlucky. I'm unlucky in love. I'm unlucky I can't lose weight. I'm unlucky and I placed an offer on the house that I wanted. I didn't get it. It's like nothing ever goes their way, and it's wah, wah, wah. And it's this big cloud of negative energy that's around them. They're like energy vampires. They will suck the joy and happiness from your life. They're just so sad to be around. I think it's one of Robert Greene's 48 rules of or 48 laws of power. Yeah, staying away from people that are in that mindset. It's just better. It's not just exclusive to women. I think it's exclusive to human beings in general. Stay away from people that are unlucky and always unhappy about something.
Yeah. I see this sometimes, and I think you do make reference to it, but there, someone listening might say, why would anybody want to hang out with someone who's unlucky, unhappy? But there tends to be this instinct within some men. I think we all have it. How it shows up is different, but to then save this poor soul. What do you say to men that are attracted to these poor souls so that they can, potentially lift them up?
Yeah, I think men inherently want to protect and save women. So, they call this dynamic the Captain Save-A-Ho dynamic in the Mano Swamp, which is, just a funny way of sort of putting it, because a lot of these women, that's just who they are, right? It's part of our nature as men to want to protect weaker women, weaker beings, weaker beings. This is why we accept refugees into certain countries based on their story or their narrative, why they're leaving. This is why we send food to starving children in Africa when they show us those videos on TV, because we want to protect, we want to preserve, we want to better things. And women are just part and parcel of that. So the thing that men need to understand is I think you have to set strong and firm boundaries around you and the people outside of your inner circle, because if you invite the wrong person into your life, you can complicate it unnecessarily. So being a kind man is good. Being a nice guy that's a pushover, that's more of a Captain Save-A-Ho, that's where you run into problems. This is where you run into trying to save women, or you get guys that will wife up a gal that's got 4 kids from 3 different fathers, a whole bunch of debt. Like these guys swoop in routinely and will give up their life savings and their opportunity to father their own children to raise another man's children and bail her out. It's very common. I really hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to watch the full-length podcast, you can find that over here, that clip's from. If you're newer to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe over here, and pin down below in the top comment, you'll find a bunch of useful links to my website, my supplement line, books, and a bunch of other stuff. Have an amazing day. Peace out.